Hello, everyone, and welcome again to now week 13, the final 4 weeks, final four for advanced exercise physiology for Kin 416, sorry. And we're getting close to finalizing this chapter. We're probably going to talk a little bit more about it on Wednesday as the final class for this week, and actually for almost an entire week, right? Being we have Easter break that starts on Thursday. And goes through Monday. We'll have this particular lecture video, another one on Wednesday. Your discussion board post is not going to be due until the following Tuesday. I want to give you a little breather there, okay? I advise you, even though you're technically on a break, do the best you can to maybe try to do it earlier so you're not trying to do something only on Tuesday next week, and then all of a sudden Tuesday's work starts as well, and you'll have a discussion board post for week 14 to advance notify you. This will be due by Friday of that week. I'm going to have a calendar for you shortly as well. I'm going to try and get that up today, if not worst case tomorrow morning, but I'm hoping to get it to you today with a little more clarity in the course announcements for exactly what's going on the last 4 weeks, so you know. I've already posted, it's been in our course announcements ever since January, but the dates were incorrect for the paper, for guidance on your paper, which is coming up here with the rough draft due in a couple weeks and the final draft due the last week of class, the last Friday. And your final project, I have not put out specific info for, because the bottom line is, I know you want to get started on it. A couple of you email me about it, but I'm trying not to overload you with everything all at once, or seemingly all at once, to make this last month tough. It is what it is. The expectation or hope is that you've been preparing all along, but that being said, very doable. Okay, very doable. And you should always email me or call me if you have questions. I expect that. Not many of you have. Some of you have emailed me several times, and that is fine. You do it as often as you need to. It's a difficulty, no question about it, with us being online, and I want you to be able to communicate as often as you need. And I have yet to have one person, even one, want a phone call. We can do that. Okay, I want you to certainly let me know if we need to talk by phone. If you need to be able to see my face as we talk, we can schedule something, a Zoom meeting, or we can schedule something with FaceTime or something like that, whatever you want to do as well, whatever I need to do. Okay, even if my daughter's crawling all over me when we're trying to do it, if it's during the day, it probably will be, because it's usually my wife on the calls all day long, and I try to do things in the morning and the late at night to get stuff to you. That being said, do what you need to, okay, and we'll get through it. I don't want you to get through it. Wearing my silly shirt, my Spider-Man shirt today, because I kind of feel like at times we need to get a little more fun involved here. It's hard to convey that sometimes through a video versus necessarily being live. But, I do love this stuff. Hope you're still interested in all this stuff. I know it can be heavy on you and there's the rest of life on you as well. But we want to keep kind of powering through it the best that we can. Ironically, we're in anaerobic training, power training, right, so to speak. But simply just holding your nose to the grindstone, so to speak, but also taking time for you as you need. And if you need to call to me and vent, no joke, no kidding. If you're upset about, I got a paper, I got a final project, I've got discussion board, but call me. Go off on me on the phone. I'm really encouraging you to do that, okay? I don't want you to be having things pent up. There's nothing worse than internalizing things or making a complaint fest if you're doing it. And I don't know if you are. I'm just saying, because I know people tend to do it. And I know certainly friends and family have done it with each other over the course of these last 3 weeks of being confined in their homes in different areas of the country for my family. Don't let it be held up. Make sure you're talking to people in a way that you can help each other, not talking to complain for the purpose of complaining with no end in sight. You got to get through your problems, your challenges, your obstacles, not just let it become something that weighs you down. I know it's easier said than done, but we're moving forward. All right. Now, principles for testing and training for anaerobic power are next level. Now talking about a few things. Actually, one thing I want to mention too is that a couple of you have actually said, because I put on your discussion boards that you lost a point if you didn't cite an APA format, and I totally get your frustration with that. I understand, because if you go to different sites, if you're not very clear about APA format, if you go to certain sites, if you don't actually click on I want APA format, not just any format or MLA format, or there's so many different formats. APA format is what we need here. Okay, and you want to make sure that you've actually clicked, like if you go to I don't know if it's pronounced Mendeley or Mendeley, Mendeley. Hey, a couple of you cited that, where you go to look for your citations. Make sure you've selected APA format, not just letting it cite it however it wants to make sure you have in the proper place the citation very specifically. I don't think anybody's had any problem with the authors. The year, some people are still putting the year, month, just the year. Okay, title of article, And that title of the article doesn't have to be capped unless it's capped in the article itself. First letter of the first word certainly does. The title of your journal or periodical does need to be capitalized, the entire thing for any primary words, right? Volume number needs to be in italics along with the periodical. Some of you guys missed that. And then the issue number in parentheses without a space next to the volume number. To be clear why this is so important, if you're ever going into a grad degree, it's going to be more important. They're going to really nail you on that. PhD or anything higher than PhD, well, I guess there's always potential more beyond any level. But that said, anything to do with research, it's going to be more difficult, not less. And the more you get down the little nuances, the better. And the fact of the matter is that APA format is required at Concordia for our coursework. That said, I will allow you and make it really clear once again for the final time, so I don't want to harp on it too much. I'll give you the point back. Go back in there and change it over to this format you're seeing right in front of you right now. Make sure it looks like that. And then I'll give you the point back. That's simple. Okay. Once you have that down, it's a piece of cake. And many of you have just been having it correct the whole way through, and a few of you had a few minor things. I'm not worried about or bothered by it. You just got to make sure it's done. Okay. But it's hard when different locations and sites cite it differently. I know. Welcome to the world of any level of expertise, right? There's always experts that disagree on things or that don't cite things the same way, and that can be a challenge. You got to go with the expectations that are put right in front of you. Now, remember that heart rate, pace, and RPE are useful guides of intensity. Blood lactate would be really nice to be able to be using as a guide if we could be taking blood. But the fact of the matter is we always have heart rate to be taking for measuring intensity. Pace, we're measuring it by speed, or measuring it specifically more by force output. Typically how fast you can, I'm talking about typical sport, how fast or how hard you throw or run over a given distance, how fast the ball get there, the puck get there, anything related to that, how far do you get across the pool or over the land, grass, track, court, how high do you jump? Those are all pace. Okay, and RPE is a subjective measure. RPE must be measured in practice. In the game time, actually, RPE should be measured too. You can actually see it on people's faces. Usually you can see the first place you notice someone's change in their RPE, their perception, not just the perception, but actual intensity. Look at someone's facial expressions. You cannot have good form. I've said this to many of you who have my class in 406 for XPhys, that if your facial expression is starting to get ugly, your form is already breaking down. So you can actually minimize overly high stress by looking at facial expressions. And when they start getting overly serious or a scrunched up face, anything like that, looking like they're not breathing anymore, like they're clenching and they're basically blocking off that glottis, right, the Valsalva maneuver, and those kinds of things are not good things. We want to avoid that. So if you see it happen, we're not talking about in the middle of competition. There's only so much you can do if it's happening. You kind of yell at your players or your teammates or whoever trying to help them out. But in practice, you stop. You take a break and return to it again. Give me some guidance about what might be causing that to make sure it's not happening and impairing performance, possibly increasing injury. And certainly fatiguing, right? Heart rate should be taken for 6 seconds after every single set. Not saying it's done regularly. Should be. No question about it, that it should be measured at the end of every single set on a regular basis, along with RPE, and then pace is measured and recorded during every set. Should have, ideally, if you're a coach, you've got an aide or someone else who can write stuff down. You're coaching and training and teaching and looking at information needs to be taken care of and talking to people. Somebody else is recording all the data. That's what really should be happening, so you can actually manipulate variables more effectively down the road. Our initial assessment, our formal assessment, then our informal assessments, which is every single session or practice or game. There's more informal assessments. The more you track and record, the more you know what's going on and do a better job in planning, preparing for the future, right? We know this, it's just rarely done. And the difference between knowing something and actually following through on it is usually the difference between someone who's never really succeeds very well and someone who does. Okay? But don't confuse effort with output. You can have your heart rate be high, you can have your RPE be high, performance could be low, and that's never good. Performance needs to be what it's supposed to be. Then we take a look at heart rate and RPE and decide if we need to adjust anything. But first, we have to make sure the output's there. If the output's not there, then who cares what the heart rate and the RPE are? Something's not right. So we got to adjust somehow by increasing rest period, increasing work period, decreasing intensity, maybe all the above, call it for the day maybe, but we need to adjust those things. Heart rate is not something we're aiming for ever. It's never a goal. It's something that gives us feedback, biofeedback, as to what's going on. It's the objective measure, biofeedback-wise. Blood lactate would be the ideal, but in this case, heart rate's our best objective measure, in addition to the objective measure of what the actual performance is, right? And of course, RPE is our subjective measure. Between the combination of those three things, we're going to have a tremendous guide for how to determine appropriate specific exercise specificity to make sure we're getting the proper adaptation to imposed demands. Okay. That said, pretty much said all of that. What's the primary mode of measuring exercise intensity? Is it pace? Is it force output, speed, movement efficiency? Well, first and foremost, if form breaks down, that's the number one thing. Okay, no question about it. Many of you talked about intensity being the most important factor with training, and it's hard to disagree with that. Generally speaking, we just got to be clear about what the goal is in a given moment. We're not trying to reach a specific intensity when we're teaching skill. To be really clear, it's actually individual session specific. It's not necessarily intensity specific every single time, because we want to make sure that skill is there, movement efficiency, coordination, neuromuscular facilitation, or communication between nervous system and muscular system comes first. Okay. Pace, or the force output, which could be synonymous in some cases. The book refers to pace in almost ways it can be a little bit different. And honestly, at the end of the day, who cares about terminology as long as we all understand what's going on? Meaning we may have some differentiations. Sprint is one of the words that was used in the textbook referring to aerobic power, when sprint by definition is a maximal speed over a short distance. So it doesn't really jive with what we refer to as aerobic. It's really more anaerobic. However, if someone uses that term, they need to make sure it's clear when they use that term what they're referring to, right? So someone would say, oh, I'd call that a sprint. I wouldn't call that a sprint. Well, what's the goal? They have the same goal but different name for it? As long as we're clear about what's happening, okay? So always would be doing that when it comes to clarification for actual programming. That said, heart rate and RPE measurements, we already talked about when and how very briefly. After each set, for 6 seconds, taking a heart rate, multiply by 10. You want to take it 6 seconds after, because that's the best indicator of the intensity that just happened. If you wait too long, like take it for 60 seconds, heart rate's dropping the whole time, not an accurate measure of actual intensity of the training set, okay? And want to make sure that we're getting clarity on the intensity right now. That's why it's only 6 seconds, a very short block. Heart rate monitor, chest transmitter is the best way to measure heart rate. The watches and all those other materials and pieces of equipment can be reasonably accurate for some people and some of the time. However, they don't have the best contact. There's laxity there, okay? And so consequently, it's not tight. You have to have actual electrodes really having attachment to the skin, okay? And a very good contact point. Those chest transmitters have a very strong contact point. Your watch is not necessarily so there's can be disruption in that feedback, let alone the calibration of the watch, let alone the fact that it's actually measuring it more at the wrist versus something closer to the chest. All those variations can play a role. How will we know? Take heart rate in multiple ways. That's the only way you're really going to know for each person to really be clear about whether it's accurate or not. And again, for interval type purpose, we talk about heart rate wise. The entire purpose for intervals is to allow more work at higher intensities than would be possible to do continuously. Fartleks were basically designed or created in the 1930s, Swedish term, talking about fast, slow, fast, slow. It's really more of glycolytic type training, or maybe even aerobic type training potentially. It's typically thought of as being more anaerobic, which makes it more glycolytic, whereas intervals in general could be aerobic or anaerobic. So I want to make sure really clear. Intervals are just breaking up work and rest. Okay, there's no specific absolute for what is called an interval. Make sure you're talking about aerobic versus anaerobic, and you're very clear about the goal in your interval, what you're trying to accomplish. We have to make sure we understand energy systems and muscle fiber types to be sure that is the case, right? Be clear about the goal is. You say you want to be maximally fast, then I want you to go maximally fast for a very short period of time. Some people would argue as little as 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, could be as much as 30 seconds, but you're kind of going into creatine phosphate, maybe in the early stages of glycolysis, anaerobic glycolysis. Consequently, you're not going to get maximal speed. You'll get top end speed in the 90 to 100% area, but you're not going to be maximal top end speed because you're going for too long. It's not right or wrong. Just be clear about the goal. Okay. And of course, the more we get out of that first 10 seconds and beyond at maximal outputs, okay, then we're going from type 2X down to type 2A fibers, and of course down so on for longer durations of activity as the predominant fiber type, assuming that we're going for a maximal output, right? Just because you go jog for 100 meters, this should be pretty obvious, but to be clear, you jog 100 meters, you never probably got involved much of any type 2A fibers, probably not anything type 2X, even though it's a very short work period. That's an aerobic interval, okay, because you're jogging, your intensity is low. If either the intensity is high or the duration itself goes longer, if the duration goes longer in general, then it gets more and more aerobic. If the intensity is high, it gets more and more anaerobic. Okay, I want to make sure we're really clear about those differentiations here. And that said, one more thing I want to mention with that. The opposite should be the case with rest periods, generally speaking. If your goal is to going shorter to be more intense, you got to be thinking longer rest. That's not the way a lot of people do it. They want to go short work, short rest. That's fine, but the more you do that, you're more toward aerobic type training. Okay, depends on the goal. Not right or wrong. What's the end goal? Okay, please don't ever go away and say we were told this was wrong or right. No, just be clear about the goal. Okay. Muscle length tension. An isolated or single joint muscle, basically any muscle that's actually only has attachment at one location on a bone and crosses one joint. Okay, certain aspects of your biceps, not all the biceps actually are single joint muscles. The biceps brachii is actually more than one bone. Okay, whereas the brachialis or brachioradialis are actually single joint muscles. Okay, that being said, it exerts its maximal force. A single joint muscle exerts maximal force or tension in a lengthened type position, generally meaning from the standpoint where the text referred to it as that you can still maintain tension up to a certain point, just about by at full length. Okay, resting length. It doesn't mean you can actually handle the most force from a muscular standpoint at that specific point. To be really clear, because we're not just talking about muscle here. We have to be careful when we talk about muscle length tension. We're not just talking about what's going on at the muscle itself. Okay, we're talking about what's happening at the joint as well, and we actually take into account both joint stress and muscular stress from a single joint perspective. In most cases, not all. Typically speaking, you're strongest about 90 degrees, midway through, about mid-range. So it could be a little less than 90, a little more than 90. Your book kind of talks about that a little bit, but sometimes it refers to more than a single joint muscle, a dual joint muscle, and this is biomechanics. So this is technically more than we really have the time to go into great detail on. Leave that to Professor Gaines and biomechanics class, okay? But to get some real brief understanding here, generally speaking, we're talking about most motions for the most part. You want your tension to be highest somewhere mid-range of a given single joint. Okay, when you're actually incorporating more than one joint, we just have to make sure we can maintain control throughout the range of motion. But generally speaking, we want to make sure maximal tension for single joint type motions is pretty much the case near mid motion itself, mid-range. Okay, not at the extreme shortening where you are what we call actively insufficiently capable of producing force, or at full lengthening where you're the same. You're weaker. We'll come back to that in a second. Force capacity basically increases from full length toward 90 degrees. Okay, in other words, concentric action. If you start doing that arm curl and you're bringing your arm up here and you're kind of going to do your arm curl, slowly bringing your arm up here, when you go from pretty much full length, essentially near resting length, and you're actually into basically neutral position, you start moving into concentrically coming up, right? When you start doing that, as you're closing on 90 degrees, generally speaking, you have a higher and higher capacity for producing force. Okay, generally speaking. Okay, and as you move past that point, you get more and more towards shortening. After mid-range, you get weaker again. It's the way you're built. It's what we call your strength curve. Okay, from a single joint perspective for muscles, generally speaking, you're going to get weaker passing the midpoint concentrically as you're coming up. As you go toward eccentric, you're going to be getting stronger as you approach that mid-range again, and getting weaker again as you pass it, going into neutral position. Okay, so the initiation of the first half of each motion, each direction, generally speaking, is where you tend to be getting strongest mid-range, and then get weaker as you go. So a good general rule or guideline is for the best win, shall we say, for the joint, the connective tissue, and the muscle, let alone the movement. Really should be talking about movement first anyway, but those things involved, you want to get tension to be increasing to about mid-range, and we're talking about strengthening here, okay? Not every single time in life is it always the challenge at the same at that point, but for the best stress upon the joints without overly stressing the joints, because the joint fails, who cares how strong the muscle is? If your connective tissue tears, it doesn't matter how strong your muscle is. Matter of fact, that happens with steroids. I don't know if we talked about before or not. People take steroids on a regular basis, can actually enhance recovery, so they actually can increase their ability to train more frequently at higher intensities than someone who's not taking such supplements, right? Consequently, though, they may increase hypertrophy, they may increase maximal force production, and be able to recover quickly and come back and do it again, which can be monumental results for muscle. And it does not have the same response with connective tissue. So while muscle is growing, connective tissue does not. And consequently, guess what happens? A lot of people who take steroids on a regular basis, they have a major connective tissue tear at some point in their training, and it dramatically affects their longevity of their training career. Something to think about among all the other reasons why you have to take those things into account. That said, what you're really looking for about mid-range is the optimal actin-myosin cross-bridging about mid-length with the optimal excitation contraction coupling necessary for proper force production. Okay, you don't want to have the tension try to be like get on those machines that you can use switch it to make it tougher in the beginning or tougher at the end and say, well, I'm weaker at the very at full shortening, so I need to put more load on there so I can challenge myself more at full shortening. Actually, that goes against physiology. You're trying to argue against physiology now in physics. Okay, you're going to be weaker at full shortening. You're going to be weaker at full lengthening. You're going to be stronger for single joints, about mid-range for single joint muscles, I should say. Okay, that being said, we've got to take more into account than just what little pieces of information we tend to hear. The optimal weight is the one that can be controlled. All things aside, at the end of the day, if someone has control while they're doing it, there's probably minimal risk to someone's connective tissue, their joints, and they can still get benefit to the muscle depending on how they're training. It's not just what load you lift, right? It's really about how you lift it, the direction of your motion, all those things. A lot of things come into play, which we'll talk about more in a minute here. That said, we want to try to match, kind of alluded to it here, your strength curve to something called the resistance profile. Other than biomechanical circles, you don't hear it very much. The book kind of talked about it, but didn't really talk about it in these terms necessarily, that your strength curve is how you are from a single joint perspective, getting stronger, strongest, mid-range, weaker until the end range, and then get stronger, strongest toward mid-range again as you're eccentrically lengthening the muscle under load and getting weaker to the end range back toward neutral, okay, eccentrically. And that said, the resistance profile perfect world would match that. When you match the two together, you have optimal stress on joint, connective tissue, and muscle, not just one or the other. Okay. That said, variable resistance like cables and other machines allow for greater control through great range of motion. You can actually move them a lot more so than actually like some machines themselves, which may have, some machines, by the way, are not variable resistance. They have the same exact load throughout your entire range, which is really not ideal. That basically that isokinetic kind of concept with a constant force. It's interesting for testing for value there, but for regularly training, we're trying to have the exact same force output throughout entire range of any joint anywhere. It really kind of goes against the capacity for stress for a given joint, and I'd be very careful with that outside of testing. And that being said, when you're in a controlled environment, it's a different story, but you would generally speaking want to have that variability at the right place and time in a given joint motion. And again, coming down to the whole idea, if you can actually move with control, move fluidly, then it's probably not a big deal either way. But what's the end goal? What are you trying to accomplish here? Are you wasting time? Or are you benefiting yourself more by pursuing a given way of training? Okay. That said, cable machines, one of the nice things about having pulleys that can move and a cable that can actually be pulled in every given direction and wrapped around you, whatnot, they're very versatile. However, they require a high level of coordination, which we'll talk about as well. And but in not all cases is that necessarily the most ideal situation. Okay. A lot of machines only have one plane of motion, which we'll talk about too. So resistance training prescription. One thing we have to do first is assess someone's capabilities and limitations. Make sure we know what they can do and what they're limited by. Unfortunately, when I often have asked the question for many people, what is where should we train? Just above our current capabilities or more toward our maximal capacity? Like, no, not your maximal capacity, meaning one thing I can do for long periods is this, one thing I can barely do for one time is this. We don't train what I can barely do for one time on a regular basis all the time. Body can't handle that kind of stress. Not to mention it challenges probably proper technique, proper recovery, the ability to get proper hormonal balance, all those things. Want to make sure we are taxing someone only as much as we need to get a positive result, right? The least physiological stress to get a positive result. One of the best quotes I've ever heard in a physical training, physiology, is finding the least stress to achieve the best result, okay? And one of those ways we can do that is be clear about, first of all, the training goals and outcomes. What are you trying to accomplish? Some people say you shouldn't use machines so they're not functional. Well, what do you mean by functional? It's the first question I always want to ask. If you by functional, if you mean activities of daily living, no, getting on a knee extension machine is not necessarily indicative of something you would do in normal life. However, it does not mean that you doing knee extension activities wouldn't have some transferability toward function. And here's the kicker. If you can actually perform exercises and you see functional benefit from doing it, you have found yourself a functional exercise. It's different for everyone. Everyone's needs are different, right? There was some studies that were done, 20, 30 years ago, I believe now, by a gentleman named Wayne Westcott, with older individuals, older adults, and basically 55 and older. And he had them doing a machine pull down, the cable pull down. He had them doing a machine chest press, uniplanar, like just out and back, okay? Multi-joint, meaning elbow was going into extension and shoulders going into horizontal adduction, but the plane itself was one plane, horizontal plane, okay? And he had them also do knee extension and knee flexion, right? Quadriceps and hamstring focused, and for golf. And he wanted to see if that would improve their golf game, so to speak. And people who did those 4 exercises, none of which of those exercises have really looked anything like a typical golf swing with the hip rotation, with the hip extension, which is not part of any of those exercises, and with the positioning. The lat pull down a little bit of this action, the arm comes down and across, but coming through and following through, no, a lot of that motion is really not even there with any of the exercises that were given. And the average driving distance over a few weeks of training that way for a couple, 2-3 times per week was 20 to 30 yards on their driving distance. That's phenomenal. Assuming they're older people, they probably weren't driving 300 or 400 yards. They're probably driving 180 to 220 yards. You add 20, 30 yards on top of that. That's at least a 10 to 15+% improvement in a few weeks. That's phenomenal. Okay. Now you can argue a lot of reasons why that might be the case, but we got to be clear about there can be transfer without necessarily exactly simulating a motion. In fact, when you try to exactly simulate a motion with something where the direction of external forces are not the same, like taking a cable and trying to throw, like you get that cable and you grab the cable pulley and try to throw like you're throwing a ball. When you throw a ball, it's ground reaction forces of you pushing off the ground and generating power through your legs and then through the core and the mobility of your arm that helps that throw with power for the throw. But it's not arm strength per se that's your biggest factor there at all. If that were true, every person who can win those strongman competitions would also have the fastest pitch in baseball, because those guys are freaks how strong they are, okay? But that's not what it's about. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more specific than that. Movement skill-wise, and where the direction of force is being created through the skill from the standpoint of ground up. Okay, not trying to simulate it by simulating the motion. Or one of my personal favorites is people taking a cable machine and trying to simulate their golf swing with a cable machine. And again, it's into biomechanics, but their golf swing, ground is pulling on you the entire time. Gravity is pulling you straight down. So every moment in that swing, there's gravity pulling on you. That's the force you're working against. In a cable golf swing, wherever you put that pulley going, if it is not pulling from straight down, it's not the same. And it would have to move with you, by the way. The cable pulley, if you swung and you come through, the cable pulley would have to move along with you the whole way through that swing. That doesn't happen. You cannot match that. I wouldn't try to train that. You train independent individual factors of the swing. You train independent hip extension. You train independent dorsal rotation. You train independent shoulder flexion or shoulder adduction. But you do not try to train them all at once with a machine that cannot possibly simulate gravity. Okay? The current level of ability, where is the person right now? Not just saying, well, I'm going to get you 1 rep max. What can you do for 1 rep? Why would we do that? Someone who's never trained before. That would be fine if they have a background and we're testing them. But we don't want to test someone other 1 rep max day 1 out of the gate. That's a lot of stress on someone's joints for what they can handle. And we don't know what they can handle yet. Probably a better recognition is something they can do for 10 times. Or what can you handle for a minute? Ask them, what weight can you lift? This is one of my favorite things to do. What weight can you lift for probably 10 times or more? Oh, I don't know. Just ballpark it. With this dumbbell over here, I go reach for one. They go, oh, probably heavier than that. I say, good. Then I give you the one I was about to grab, which is too light for you, you think. So we are sure, we assume people are overestimating their strength rather than underestimating it to test them initially and then move up. It's easy to move up. Try to go backward, you're going to hurt somebody, and consequently, it's going to be a bigger step backward than you think. That said, the initial formal assessment, we've already talked about a few possible assessments. We talked about 1 rep max testing already a little bit. We talked about a little bit the other tests we can do glycolytically, power-wise to some extent as well. It's also part of your discussion board post we've talked about. I'll probably cover just a little bit more in our final class lecture on Chapter 7 of anaerobic power and testing. But generally speaking, your formalized assessment should be every 4 to 12 weeks. It could be less often than that, but are you really going to get a benefit in there? Are you really going to see change in there? Got to bring the cat out of here. Okay, please, man, I'm still recording. Okay. And the reality of having a child, we're doing this too, and a cat. No, cat, you can't come up and see me right now. No, not right now. I know, not right now. Okay. That said, hey, the realities of life. For muscle exerting its maximal force or range, retention, and length of position, It's going to require us to be only doing that once in a while. For actual assessments, we're looking at every few weeks. Okay, no, let's get that out of here, please. Okay, we're looking at doing this every few weeks, 4 to 12 weeks. 12 weeks is probably the maximal time you want to go before retesting someone. Every 4 weeks for essentially for expectation of being able to see any real measurable improvement. Okay. Okay, Maddie, you gotta go. You gotta leave. Please leave. Please leave. Okay, the cat won't go off unless you go. Okay. Okay. And that said, gradual overload is 1 to 10% daily or weekly, with proper variables of how frequently you train, the intensity you train, the type or tool you train, time or attention, rest, all those factors. Okay, see, welcome to life. Now I'm gonna have to deal with a crying child that I've made cry. This is the reality of life. I know you face stuff too. I cannot get any time in to actually create videos without the reality of having to upset my poor 4-year-old who'd rather be spending time with me. I feel you. That's why I want you to tell me when you have challenges too. It's why I'm recording right through this, because the time for me to be able to do this is very limited, and I barely was able to get through part of this video before I got interrupted there. My apologies on that, but it's the reality of what way things are, right? That being said, that physical activity readiness questionnaire, the PARQ form, there are forms available online if you Google them to be able to see if someone's ready to train, if there's any physical health or injury related issue, stroke, basically high blood pressure, previous stroke, previous heart issue, pre-existing injury, recovering from a surgery that's going to predicate them not training at a given intensity or for a given period. Okay. We're training individuals, we're not training populations. We want to train a movement skill first, coordination, control, okay? And we're basically talking about neural control versus hypertrophy here in the first 4 to 6 weeks of training. When you first initiate a new level of stress, the gains are typically neural. We're not going to see hypertrophy gains in muscular size that's even measurable, generally speaking, for anything earlier than 6 weeks from training. Okay, up to about 12 weeks as slow responders. And some people never have major gains. There's a limitation for everyone. We won't know until we get there what their maximal capacity is. And it's going to take a long time, many, many months and years to really determine someone's maximal capacity. It's all theoretical until that time frame. Okay, that said, skill first. If they don't move well, we don't add load, we don't add stress, we don't add intensity, we don't add duration, none of the above. We start with something light, we know they can handle for long periods and move from there from a general perspective, okay? Dynamic versus isometric. Isometric is very useful for the beginning phases of exercise when you're trying to teach someone stability and control in a stable position, but generally speaking, we want to get them moving for a greater overall benefit strength-wise. Eccentric is not where we're strongest, where we can handle the most load because it's actually the least amount of effort required. Then isometric, then concentric. Generally speaking, we don't have to hold or pause in a given motion. Some people do. They're trying to give themselves a break. If you theoretically want to get the maximal benefit from a dynamic action, you don't pause. Other than if you want to show control for some reason, pause somewhere, that's totally fine. From a general perspective, actual benefit to the motion itself, you don't want to pause the motion. You want to have a fluid motion in both directions. So you want to make sure you have control eccentrically and concentrically. Okay. Joints and joint actions to connect to tissue once again before muscles. Movements come first, muscles will follow. Whenever someone says I want to train a blank muscle, first thing I ask them is what movement will do that. We want to make sure we understand what the movement is we're looking for, not just the muscle we're trying to hit. Okay. Loading 1 rep max. Again, before we go there, and the book mentioned about 60-70% to make sure you don't overload someone the first time you do 1 rep max. Probably, again, a better way of looking at it is how much can you do with low loads at longer reps, or more importantly, for longer periods. I'd much rather count time than I would count reps, because reps have so much variability in terms of overall benefit. If I do 15 reps super fast versus 15 reps super slow, it really wasn't about the 15 reps, was it? It was about the speed you did it, tempo-wise, and the duration of time in which you covered it. Number of reps is really overstated sometimes for how many reps you do. It's more about the time under tension along with the tempo in which you move that predicates what your end result is going to be. Assuming all things being equal, you're moving well and getting benefit from the exercise. Okay. That said, yes, up towards 80 to 100% max over time, but consider higher rep positions or rep numbers with longer work periods for the first few weeks of training someone. Low and moderate intensity before high intensity, not a surprise there. Reps versus time, again, endurance before strength. This should be a given. Why we'd ever want to go strength before someone has any endurance background whatsoever makes no sense, because endurance is type 1 fibers. That's where we're going to start getting the benefit of getting proper mobility, getting proper flexibility by moving under control for slower motions or for longer durations of time, eventually building towards strength. No one would ever argue that maximizing anaerobic training is where you're going to get the most results from. There's no question that's true, but you also have to have the base first. You can't have someone start their political career as the president of the United States from a standpoint of career in general. We have a president right now that started there before they did anything else politically, but he was successful in business and a known quantity. That's an unusual situation, right? That being said, certainly from a standpoint of generally speaking, there's always outliers, but people need to move slowly through different levels before they expect to get to the elite level, shall we say. Time under tension is always recommended over reps because of the benefit to the goal of the energy system involved and the muscle fiber type involved and control of the motion. If you never again count another rep, I'd be very happy. Just determine what the work period is you want to be, okay, and the speed in which you want to do it. That said, time under tension 90 seconds or longer is more towards muscular endurance, and maximal strength, maximal power, maximal agility, all those things are much more towards 30 seconds or less. Between the two is more glycolytic, okay? Anaerobic conditioning still, but between those two, that's a good general range. It's not exact, it's not perfect, but a good general range, okay? Volume of work. 1 set per exercise should come first. Then for at least 3 sessions, probably before you ever consider adding a second set or more repeat sets, doing the same thing. Then you consider adding more frequency more often before you increasing volume, before you increase more sets per exercise. Exercise selection, machines or simple exercises with one joint action, low coordination type motions should be first for someone who has no background in training whatsoever before you give them a dumbbell. If you ever laid someone on a bench with 2 dumbbells, it's never done a chest press before, and they go do a chest press, it looks like someone in outer space with the way those dumbbells are floating around. It's no joke. You wouldn't believe it until you saw it. If you have a background in training that seems foreign to you because you've been doing it for years. But the average person has no coordination and control. They've never done lifting before, so we don't start them that way. We start with something that's low coordination requirement, low neural requirement, so they can actually get the benefit of understanding the motion before we start adding load, adding volume, and all those things. And then multiplanar, more complex exercises to follow. The book and other texts often talk about, and they're right, when a person's ready, you get more overall benefit from more complex multiplanar type exercises because there's more going on, more overall developmental benefit there, but it's not where you start someone from day one, okay? Who needs to be more stable before unstable. When we say stable before unstable, we're also talking about loads. A machine is very stable. A dumbbell, unstable. A barbell, more stable. You move one side, the whole body moves because it's more of a stable positioning. A lot of people like barbells because they can move more load with the barbell. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get stronger lifting with a barbell. You could argue you'd have more strength benefit with a dumbbell in many situations because you're forced to stabilize while also moving load, getting more core involvement, getting better coordination and control of the joints, not just having a stable load that unless you have maximal symmetry, meaning your left and your right are the same strength, which is extremely rare, by the way, probably should limit your time spent doing bilateral exercises. The question of bilateral versus unilateral. That's a question of what you need, what you want, weighing the risks and benefits, which is what it all comes down to. If exercise were what I like to think of it as, your money and your time, if you found that you really liked something, but it didn't get you anything from it, you'd do it because you like it, but you wouldn't expect a lot out of it. Unfortunately, a lot of people do things because they like when they're doing exercises with limited response. And if they really thought about being time and money, they wouldn't spend a lot of time doing those exercises. It's interesting. I call them ice cream exercises. Some of those exercises that are just not really advisable, like doing an arm curl where it looks like you're dancing. It's fun, but is it really getting you much benefit? You're moving a lot of load, but are you really benefiting your biceps? Not if you're incorporating a lot of other joint actions, probably putting a lot more stress on the rest of your body with minimal benefit to your biceps, as opposed to being really still, which doesn't look as cool. You can't lift as heavy a weight, but you can get more benefit, okay? From a standpoint of biceps strength and benefit to stress at the shoulder and the elbow. Simple before complex, we've kind of already said that. It's you can be as complex as you can handle, but generally speaking, if someone's having difficulty in an exercise, performing with high levels of skill, we get more simple. Take away some of the joint stress. Slow before fast. You can't move slow, don't do it fast. Anybody I've ever had that had running in all my track teams I've coached and track athletes over the years, and little basketball players that I've coached many times over the years, if they can't do the same motion slow, they can't go into a squat control to come up there. I don't want them jumping up a lot. Doing a lot of heavy loaded jumping or any sort of explosive jumping. They can't even handle the motion slow, let alone the same thing fast. The running, we actually do little form running type drills that go in super slow. And if you can't slow it down to the nth degree slow, then by the time you make it go fast, you're going to have very little coordination. It's going to be out of control, risking greater injury and losing performance potentially. Okay, there's always the freaks. I mean this in a good way, that they seem to have horrible form and they're incredibly fast and powerful and all, and they tend to do real well in their sports and their performances. There's always those people. Those are outliers. Again, we're talking about the majority of 98th percentile of people. Majority of people, we need to make sure we're following some of these basic guidelines and rules. Low before high loads should be a given. Some people say, should we do cardio before strength or strength before cardio? Should I go do my cardio first or strength first? Goal specific. If your goal is aerobic conditioning, like mine is right now, I've lost a lot of my aerobic conditioning. My anaerobic strength, so to speak, my maximal strength is still very high, but my aerobic conditioning has been lost, and my glycolytic performance has been lost, but I don't want to do my glycolytic activity too much, so without the aerobic base, I won't be able to recover as well. Okay, and it risks more long-term stress by too much stress glycolytically when I don't have the base aerobically. Something to consider. But whatever's more important, you do that first. The book refers to being high intensity before low intensity. Well, if you're going to do any high intensity exercise, you don't want to do it when you're fatigued. That's really what they're talking about. Okay. The center before the periphery. Some people say inside out. Some people say core before your arms and your legs. Any of those things is kind of the same thing we're talking about. Larger before smaller muscles. Yeah, but more specifically, want to train kind of center out, so to speak. We don't want to fatigue anything you're going to be needing later on. That also comes into play, like when we're actually working on a given exercise program, we got to be clear about what do we need the most. That should be first. Okay. What do we need less of? That follows. Okay, all those things have to be taken into account. Nothing easy about that. It's a very complex interaction. You have to do a lot of plug and play in addition to the rules we're talking about here. That said, we got to train individuals, not populations. These are all generalities. When you get a person in front of you, an individual, you change it up depending on what they need. You don't change it up at random based on what their needs are, their wants are, what's making sense for getting more benefit, not just randomness. The warm-up should be 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, I should say. It can be as little as 3 to 5 minutes when it's extremely hot. It can be longer than 10 to 15 minutes when it's extremely cold. But that's a good general number, working on flexibility, mobility, and session-specific movements. If you're going to go run, then maybe you should be doing some drills that are specific toward running, like marching, skipping, bounding, things like that. Not going on a bike before you go for a run. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Is it wrong? No, it's not. Is it very specific to the motion? Not really, not relationship to the external forces, which are gravity. You want to best simulate the motion you're trying to benefit as you're warming up, within reason, obviously, to prepare yourself for the joint actions and motions that are coming later at higher intensities. You're trying to ramp up the intensity slowly, yes, but is it motion-specific motions or exercises as well? The end goal of warm-up is get you ready to train. Getting the right muscle fibers to fire at the right time in the right sequence, not to get your heart rate up. That is not the goal. Okay. The main program, I put question mark to 60 minutes. If your goal is hypertrophy, maximal strength, or power, you want to be done, not including warm-up and cool down, in 60 minutes or less, because that's where the maximization of testosterone comes. And you will lose testosterone, starts to drop after about an hour of intense exercise. So anyone who has long exercise sessions, not 3 minutes, 3 hours or longer, that's fine if you're going toward endurance or you're training some skill in there. You got variations in programming, you save your stuff at the very end for conditioning. That's totally fine. But you would not want to have someone try to do high intensity stuff for 90 minutes or more. If you're doing that, you're going to be getting more and more toward aerobic type training as far as overall aerobic benefit and losing some of the glycolytic response from the standpoint that it's too intense for too long and you're losing testosterone. Performance will drop. No matter what you do, they will drop. Okay. If you're actually at that glycolytic level, or they're just a freak in a good way. That's nice stuff right there. But maximal strength and power, certainly got to keep it low. And hypertrophy is probably the one that can handle closer to 60 minutes. Maximal strength and power, our sprinters and our power athletes are always the first ones done in track and field, and everybody else was still on the track. Cool down, returning gradually toward homeostasis. That's the idea. Perfect world, by the time you finish your cool down, 10 to 15 minutes of a cool down, normal timing. More than 15 minutes if it's extremely cold, less than 5 minutes or less if it's extremely hot. for avoidance of fatigue or gradually bringing you down, gradually lowering body temperature, and the pH hopefully returning more toward normal, more alkaline, increasing the pH, reducing that acidity, right? Removing excess lactate, excess hydrogen ions, removing venous pooling, blood flowing all the areas that were being used, avoiding that bloating. By the end of your cool down, the bloating should be gone. Stiffness should be gone. Shouldn't feel sore at the end of your cool down. Should feel good. Okay, that's really important. Should feel like you want to run through a brick wall when the cool down is done, and you say, you know what, I worked out 10, 15 minutes ago, but I feel like after my cool down, I want to go do some more. That's exactly what it's supposed to be like. Go home. It's done. Okay. Your rest interval sets between sets and days. If you're a fast or low responder, it's different. Low intensity, 65% force output or less. Remember we said for VO2 max, it's extremely unlikely anyone in the history of anything has ever got more than 65% force from a standpoint of aerobically when they're engaging at their maximal possible effort at all out. Right, for 10 minutes and longer. It's highly unlikely they're going above 65% of their maximal force output. Is it possible? Sure. But is it likely? No. It's pretty low force output when you're talking about aerobic type efforts, okay, or outputs. Outputs, I should say, not efforts. Your RPE could be a 9 or a 10, but your actual output's 65% or less, okay? Differentiating output versus effort. Rest periods then, in that case, 0 to 30 seconds. You only need about 70% ATP or less. We don't need to rest longer than that. I get concerned with ratios of rest to work. They're not wrong, but they're really highly variable since we know what we know about energy systems and muscle fibers, we know rest periods. Generally speaking, we know work periods, generally speaking. We don't have to go to rest ratios. We can look at them. If they're consistent with the expectation of work and rest, relationship, the muscle fiber type involvement, goal specific, and energy system, then so be it. But want to make sure we're looking at both factors, and especially the time factor. About 1 to 2 days between that kind of training. Some people can do the same thing again later in the day, but that's pretty elite. More than likely, maybe the next day or day after. Aerobic exercise, strength muscular endurance is what strength endurance or muscular endurance is what we're talking about. Moderate intensity, glycolytic, 70 to 90% force output, getting more intense, okay? 30, 90 seconds rest. If you're going more towards 90% force output, you're probably doing right around 30 seconds, 20 seconds worth of work. You're probably gonna need 90 seconds rest. The longer rests with the shorter output, shorter work periods with higher intensities. If you're going towards 70% output for probably closer to 90 seconds or 2 minutes, somewhere in there, then we can rest more like 30 seconds. Shorter rest periods, okay? Not trying to get the best of both. I want 90% force output, 30-second rest period. You might be able to do it very briefly, but I guarantee you if we test you over time, what your actual 90% force output is, there's no way you keep that up several sets with 30 seconds rest. It's not gonna happen, okay? Or it's not your 90%. It's that simple, okay? We want 2 or 3 days between such levels of training, generally speaking. And then high intensity interval training, hypertrophy, anaerobic intervals and conditioning, like all that kind of stuff is all in that moderate range, or moderately high if you want to call it, okay? We can argue the moderately high, there's kind of a crossover in here, right, with some of the stuff into the high intensity. Unquestionably true. High intensity, we're talking about ultra high intensity, maximal high intensity, so we're really talking about here. I could say moderate intensity or near maximal types. High intensity ATP, CP, 90 to 10% force output, 2 to 5 minutes rest, because in 2 minutes, getting back pretty much all your creatine phosphate. For all ATP, can take closer to 3 minutes for most people, up to 5 minutes. Extreme freaks, in a good way, can actually get 90 seconds rest to get their ATP back. Okay, 100% ATP. That's unusual. We're looking at 3 to 4 days before doing something like that again. Okay, speed and tempo per concentric to eccentric from your end range, coming back to say for your beginning point, I should say, for the beginning, returning, going away, and coming back, going concentric, back to eccentric. Okay, we're talking about training coordination and skill, roughly 2 to 4 seconds each direction. Do you have to count? No. What's the point? Be slow. Not super slow. Super slow is an option for training someone at high intensities for their ability to control a load, but then again, you're training someone to be super slow. So do you want them to be super slow? Then I wouldn't train much like that. It's not a wrong form of training, but what's your goal? Come back to goal specific. People get too caught up and they get married. Do not get married to a training style. I really get concerned when people get really upset that we talk about a particular training style and that's what I like to do. Well, I love basketball, and I don't get particularly angry when someone says they don't think basketball is the best sport. Don't get angry about it. Just understand that there is a purpose and a time and a place. We've got to be weighing risks and benefits. And if we can't get more benefit than we have risk, we're kind of wasting time and not very efficient, not very effective. Not right or wrong, just be clear about what the goal is. Strength endurance, 2 to 3 seconds, eccentric and concentric. It's still fairly slow. Okay, we're talking about chest press, 1,001, 1,002, 1,001, 1,002, maybe 1,003-ish. But to be clear, you doing some exercises, that's easy. Doing like a calf raise and trying to make it last more than a couple seconds is going to be tough to do. You're going to lose your balance before it happens. So it's got to be specific to individual joint motions too. We're just trying to stress the idea of being slow. There's absolutely no absolute amount of time for a given direction, eccentric to isometric, or I'm sorry, eccentric to concentric to eccentric, and so on. Okay, these are good guidelines though. And then hypertrophy is still slow, 2 to 4 seconds either way. To get the picture there, if you're not training for maximal power, it's going to be slow. Maximal strength, guess what? 3 to 4 seconds, because you don't really have a choice. The weight is heavy. Doing a maximal overhead press, you're pushing as hard as you can. Push that weight up there. I don't care how hard you try. It's heavy. You can't move fast. Maximal squats, maximal deadlifts, you can't move fast, or it's not a maximal load. Okay? Everything is slow until you get to maximal power and speed and agility. When that's the goal, when they're ready, it's fast. Okay? Everything else should be slow. You don't train skill fast first. Has to be fluid first, then you train more toward power. Okay, developing these other factors, your primary goal, then keep it slow. Okay, for that moment, for that time. Progression, 1 to 10% load or force increase, or duration increase, or rest decrease on a given day or over the course of a given week. Don't overload them too much. Men versus women, testosterone differences. Men have greater muscle mass, body mass, typically due to higher testosterone levels. In cases where women have similar testosterone levels, they have similar muscle mass capabilities as men do. And similar cross-sectional area of muscle fibers, you tend to have similar strength, regardless if we're talking about men versus women. But on average, men have higher testosterone and larger shoulder and rib cage, which makes them more predisposed to better performances upper body-wise, whereas women sometimes can have better relative strength for their lower body because of their hip girth, better structural capacity for handling load from a lower body perspective. Something interesting to note there. And then final slide here, talking about some techniques and tools. Machines, constant or variable resistance. That's good in the standpoint of if you can match up that strength curve and the resistance profile as you move through a range, any given exercise. Some cases it doesn't match up well. Uniplanar, some machines are uniplanar, and whereby that's not a bad thing. Depends on your goal. However, they're very stable, which makes it very useful for someone who not only is a beginner, but someone who's having a stressful day. You're worn out, you beat up. Go use a machine. Don't find an activity that requires a high level of neural activity on a day when you're really worn out and tired. Okay, something to think about too. You don't outgrow machines. It's day-to-day specific, let alone goal specific. Suspension training. Something like TRX, they've got like bands attached to a pole above you, and you got these handles, and you're doing different exercises with it. The angle in which you do it matters. You're still fighting gravity. So if you're going at an angle diagonally and gravity's pulling you down, what you think you're working and what you're actually working are two different things. I've seen a lot of people doing squats while getting a hold of the TRX trainer, and they're squatting down and pulling themselves up, but they're defying gravity, and they're doing it versus the angle of pull. There's not even an angle of pull at all with that TRX, because the TRX is not elastic. So consequently, they're just kind of pull themselves up and down and not working the things that they think they're working. They need to be actually laying completely back, upside on their back, or laying completely facing down, prone versus supine, to maximize any particular benefit toward some of their pressing and pulling. And for the lower body, they need to be standing vertical and doing a squat or deadlift, not having a pull at an angle out this way, trying to maximize the benefit to the exercise. That's again into biomechanics. We've got to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish, not just trying to mimic something because it's interesting to do. Okay, so it requires a high control and an advanced coordination requirement for suspension training. It's not for beginners. I actually knew the gentleman who was the primary promoter for TRX for quite some time, and he would get upset with me because I would tell him that this is an advanced tool. And he goes, no, it's for everybody. Everybody can do it, but are you going to help someone squat better by having them hold the handle at an angle that has nothing to do with learning to go up and down, straight up and down from the ground? Okay, not right or wrong, just differences in way of looking at it. Free weights, weight is not force constant. The weight itself, the mass, is the same. The weight from a standpoint of force production required is going to change throughout your motion. That has to be understood. It may be the same force, but then when someone tries to simulate that from a machine and saying through full knee extension or through arm curl or through a chest press, we're keeping the force constant, just like a dumbbell. Like, no, 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 no. The force is not constant to a dumbbell because your joint angle changes through your motion, so consequently that force requirement changes, whereas the machine should change as well, ideally. Okay, but high control is required for coordination with free weights. That includes kettlebells, which are really ideal, I would say, more for advanced Olympic lifting or deadlifting. I wouldn't do over normal pressing and pulling type exercises with a kettlebell, because real simply, a kettlebell is a displaced dumbbell. Now that load is offset. It's not centered in your hand, it's offset. So if you did overhead press, it's pulling behind you. You're pulling a lot more stress onto you external rotation wise. It's not consistent with the direction of pull maybe you're looking for with the press. Got to weigh those things, okay? Body weight first. Ever heard someone say, should do body weight exercises before you do loaded exercises? Interesting. Not necessarily true. Not wrong. It's an interesting way of looking at it, but it's not right either from the standpoint that upper body, doing upper body pressing, you're doing a handstand push-up versus overhead pressing with dumbbells. It's a lot easier to do dumbbell overhead pressing than it is to do a handstand press. Why would that be first? Or a push-up versus just doing some light dumbbell chest presses or a machine chest press or cable chest press is far easier than a push-up. So by most standards, upper body training, body weight training is actually more advanced than loaded externally, and the different variable stressors you can actually have from upper body training. Lower body, however, body weight training is easier versus adding external load to your body weight when you do typical lunges, squats, deadlifts. Something to think about, okay? Not right or wrong. Elastic bands and tubing, they're portable, but the resistance profile is opposite your typical motion at the second half. As you start pulling on that band in a row, it gets tougher, 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 tougher. Mid-range, you've gotten your strongest. At the end range, you're getting weaker, weaker, weaker. It's still getting tougher. It defies how you move. I love bands in situations where you are not able to get to machines or cables, or the machines are all taken up. I need something I can attach to anywhere and make it work. Fantastic. But from the standpoint of matching up well with something like the variable resistance of a good cable machine or even dumbbells at times, it can't match up to the same value. It just can't. But that said, it can be very useful in many situations for allowing someone to be upright in the middle of nowhere doing a row versus the extreme challenge of doing a bent over row for people who have lack hip mobility and whatnot. There's always benefits there, but you got to be thinking about the total value of an exercise like this, as opposed to just saying it's better because it gives you kind of a cool way of doing something. Not that simple. Calisthenics and plyometrics, just moving through different controlled motions and sometimes being very explosive with it. First of all, again, be slow with it first. If you can't do the same motion slow, don't consider it fast. You can't do a basic bodyweight squat. Why would you have someone doing a depth jump or a drop jump? Doesn't make a lot of sense there. That comes later. Coordination value is high. Control is vital. Speed, if you want to be plyometric and be explosive, you're going to need to be very, very fast. The eccentric stress upon landing, whenever you're sprinting, jumping, bounding, hopping, anything like that, skipping, is always more intense on the landing than the takeoff. There's more stress eccentrically. When anything is explosive, when you're leaving the ground and coming back, there's always a lot more stress on you when you land, which is why you need to first train eccentrically with control before you ever consider doing such techniques. And that said, the whole concept of a plyometric exercise is a quick reflexive action. In other words, you quickly go into what would be really the eccentric direction of the muscles you're trying to engage concentrically to jump, like go into a jump. You're quickly trying to flex the hips, flex the knees, and actually getting a little bit of dorsiflexion of your ankle before you explode into hip extension, knee extension, and ankle plantar flexion. But it's supposed to be very fast to allow lengthening, proper lengthening and relaxing of your muscles you're going to be required to consider to activate to be explosive. If you ever relax, try to throw a punch or relax and jump, you'll always be amazed how stronger you are, how much more higher you can get, how much more force you can produce when you hit that bag, than if you try to be tense and hit the bag. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing, okay? That said, chains or elastics added. If you add a chain to a bar, you start doing a chest press or overhead press, it gets tougher as you go. Or a squat, it gets tougher as you go. That's fine for the first half. The problem is the second half of that motion, when you pass mid-range, or wherever it is, or each individual single joint, it gets more difficult than your capacity to handle that force. If it was difficult in the beginning, it's too difficult by the end. Or if it's too easy in the beginning to make it difficult at the end, it kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise. It's not right or wrong, but I think it's a very cool stuff to do. It's very fun. I enjoy it greatly. But is it really going to match your resistance profile? Is it going to get you the proper direction of resistance? Is it going to get you the overall long-term benefit versus something that's different to do and kind of a unique stimulus? Some people say, well, I've added 20 pounds to my bench because I've used chains when I bench. Well, you've worked hard for a long time, and I would argue that you've actually gained hypertrophy over time from using those chains, but not because you use chains did you get the benefit. I would argue I can absolutely get you as much or more benefit biomechanically, we're getting biomechanics here, with the press itself and where you apply that tool. The tools are being mentioned, so we can't just talk about them physiologically, we have to talk about them biomechanically as well to understand the overall stressors. All of them have their place, all of them have their use. Super slow, if your goal is to be able to handle great deals of force for long periods under slow durations of stress, then that's an absolutely fantastic technique, and it will gain a lot of strength in us from a slow perspective, and actually not a bad thing for connective tissue strengthening as well if you're going super slow. Super slow is referred to as 10 seconds each direction. Is it necessary for functional benefit? Probably not. Is it an option? Sure. Supersets for hypertrophy or strength endurance, doing 2 sets back to back with no break. The longer the sets go, the more and more endurance focused it becomes. You still can get some hypertrophy, but if your goal is to maximize hypertrophy, I wouldn't do supersets. You do a 60-second to 90-second set at the very, very most, preferably 30 to 60-second set, or really 40 to 75-second set, really, honestly, for hypertrophy, and take a break and come back and do it again. But the idea of doing supersets is more of an endurance type of technique. Multiple sets back to back. Sometimes people do things like several minutes of machine, or exercise over and over again, boom, 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 with no break between. Assuming you're doing that, you're actually taxing yourself more aerobically the more you go, so you have to take that into account. Not right or wrong, what's the goal? Okay. Partials, well, you can't really work different muscle fibers. People often say that by working partial ranges of motion. The fibers are either on or off. So consequently, the idea of doing partials doesn't really match up real well with the overall benefit to the entire fiber as you move through a full range of motion. It is an option to do, but it's not going to challenge fibers differently in that respect. Okay, it's a different stimulus, no question about it. Forced reps or cheat reps, I think you have to remember with these things, there's no question it's a motivational tactic for allowing someone to do they can do another rep after just not quite finishing it. Someone helps you finish that load a little bit by bringing the weight off you a little bit, and then makes you do, and you do another one after that. It allows for, honestly, the greatest difference there is more toward hypertrophy. Okay, standpoint of functional strength, however, you're actually fatigued already. Someone's helping you at the end range, so you really didn't lift that load in the first place. Consequently, you're training into fatigue more and more, which is fine for hypertrophy. Again, standpoint of maximal strength, maximal power development there, all you're really doing is exactly what it says. It's a cheat rep. Some people say a couple cheat reps is not a big deal. It's okay. Well, it's like, again, giving you 2 seconds back on the clock when the game is over. Yeah, you won the game because you got 2 seconds back and you got to shoot the ball one more time, or you got an extra couple seconds off your time, so now you beat everybody. But did you really do the work? Did you really get the benefit from it? That's questionable. Okay. That said, it's a common tactic. That's our final point for today, and then we'll talk more about this in great detail, finalizing, I should say, talk about plyos and other techniques and forms of anaerobic training, the expected benefits of resistance training, range of motion, flexibility, mobility, and introduction to Chapter 8, body composition and weight management. Short week today, and a Wednesday video. Discussion board post not due till the following Tuesday on the 14th. Please email me or call me if you have questions. I have paper information already posted for you. I will have the project information posted for you and a calendar shortly. Take care of yourselves. Be well. Let me know how I can help you. Okay. Talk to you again soon, guys.